let's talk the terrible, tragic news of Damar Hamlin. Still some hope. Last report was from his uncle. You got to take that with a grain of salt, I guess, that his oxygen levels went from 100 to 50, or his oxygen intake went from 100 to 50, meaning that he is starting to breathe on his own. That's the biggest goal, I guess, when it comes to this entire situation, according to his uncle, is that he needs to be able to breathe on his own. They're worried about lung damage. In my opinion, that's, sounds at least less scary than everything that I was thinking. My first thought was, how long was he not breathing? How bad is brain damage, that whole nine. But before we dive into that, I mean, we both watched that in real time. It was awful. Getting to cover Pitt means that we had to stick as close to that story as humanly possible. Kind of got every detail of it. What are your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, you just got to start with the experience of having to watch that in real time. It was it's certainly not something that I'm going to forget for a long time, and I think it's going to really inform how like a generation of people kind of watch football from here on out. Like that was, when you watch football, you kind of have to accept a tolerance for pretty brutal injuries, but that was completely different. That was so beyond the pale and so different. And it just I've never seen anyone react to an injury the way that those guys on the field reacted to that injury. It feels weird to call it an injury because it feels so much more serious than that. But yeah, and then in these like past few days, going back to that Pitt basketball game, they honored Damar at the Pete in the middle of the first half, and what you noticed, so they ran a bunch of the tributes that people from around the country had posted on social media and stuff, and it was truly from around the country, and you just realized kind of all the different parts of the world that Damar had touched, just all the places that he had been, most notably in Pittsburgh. It's well documented how important he was to the football scene here and just to the city in general. And then he made a similar impact in the short time he was in Buffalo, and I think I don't know, that just makes the news all the more sad. It makes what happened on that field all the more sad, when you just realize that it happened to someone who meant so much to so many different places.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the outpour of support, I mean, anybody in that situation would have got a huge outpour of support from across the NFL. But being in Pittsburgh, we kind of got a closer look at some of these guys, some people that actually knew him from playing with him or growing up here or whatever. And, you realize just how big of an impact that guy actually did have, how generous of a human being that guy was, and just like the quality of life that he lived. And it's like you said, like watching that in real time was the scariest thing I've witnessed in a football game. Easy. It was a situation where, you don't have words. Like you're freaking out, because for us, immediately you have to start digging into finding and reporting news. That's step one in our process. And then step two is, for me at least, was answering the 1,100 text messages that I got within 5 minutes, either asking me what was going on, talking about it with friends or family members, reaching out that I talk football with. And then it was calling my dad and him being like, dude, I haven't even seen anything like this. And my dad always has a story about something. It was terrifying. And then waiting all night, still waiting now for kind of anything that to come. And we don't really know what's going to happen, but I think every hour that passes, you're kind of just like, okay, like I'm going to keep my hope high. And I think that it grows a little bit with each passing moment. But it's a terrifying situation. It's an awful situation. There's different parts to dig into here. I want to kind of give a couple of shout outs. Obviously, the way that ESPN handled that situation was phenomenal. Ryan Clark and SVP were the two people that you should have had at that broadcast table during that situation. I can't think of anybody else who should have sat there and who handled that situation better. The people on the field, the people reporting from the hospital, those guys are, in my opinion, that's what you live for in this job, is a moment like that where you don't want it to be that tragic, but a moment where you're called upon to somewhat be the face of something that's much bigger than you and to be able to tell the story. And I think they did that perfectly. Um, and the NFL, there was a lot of people freaking out for like that hour there of, oh, well, they were supposed to play in 5 minutes, blah, blah, blah. I can't believe they're not going to cancel the game. I don't think anybody in the locker room or the referees or anybody actually thought that game was going to get played again. I just looked at it like they didn't really know what to
Yeah.
say, so they said some stuff.
Yeah, I think that I think that had more to do with the fact that, the players and the coaches and the refs were never really going to let that happen.
No, no
Like
chance.
I think that had less to do with anything the NFL decided, and had more to do with the decision that those men on the field made. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Ryan Clark was incredible. I also thought Booger McFarland, like Ryan Clark at least had maybe a few minutes to process some of his thoughts. Booger McFarland was thrown straight into that fire, and same with Joe
Yeah.
Buck and everyone else who was right there when it happened immediately. But like I was so struck by how the former players, the people who had actually been in that game and on that field and seen things like that, those were the people who were, I thought, the most reliable and um, I don't know, not interesting commentary, but just the most revealing, I thought, because they were the ones that were most honest to think about how truly horrifying what they saw happen was, and how much that just how that is everyone's worst nightmare when you are around a professional football player or no one or are one. There is nothing more horrifying than what you saw or saw that night.
Yeah, 100%. And shout out to all those guys. Shout out to you. I thought you did a fantastic job covering that news that night. I kept talking to my fiance, like, dude, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to approach this. I don't know how to handle this. And she's never watched football in her life. So she had she was like, oh, yeah, that stinks. And I'm like, no, like, watch the television for 5 minutes and you realize somebody might have just died. Like,
Yeah.
awful situation.